So friends, you have a fairly good idea about the 19th century American ethos that shaped, the short story in America, and that gave a lot of, interest, created that kind of curiosity about the American life. And Dr. Richa Bajaj will now be talking about the one or two short stories written by Hawthorne, and these stories then will be an indicator of how America was undergoing the change. So I request Dr. Richa Bajaj to begin her analysis of one or two short stories that she has in mind.
Yes, thank you, Professor Prakash. I want to discuss Hawthorne's story, which is titled The Birthmark. Now, The Birthmark was actually first published in a periodical, The Pioneer, in 1843. And later it was made into a collection which was Mosses from an Old Man's. Now, where Hawthorne has put together a lot of allegorical and romantic tales. So, 1843, so the two stories, that I discussed in my previous lecture, also The Artist of the Beautiful, which was again a part of the same collection. It was in 1844, and The Birthmark is 1843. So written around the same time and then published together in a collection. These two stories, talk about, they deal with the idea of science and invention from two different perspectives. Right. Now, when we look at, in the case of in the case of Hawthorne, you find that Melville had written also a review of the essay collection. It's very interesting. This essay was titled Hawthorne and His Mosses, which came out in 1850, where Melville actually talks about how he had not, how even when the collection came out in 1846, he had not read it, and how, Hawthorne should receive the due that he really deserves. That, there is all sort of writing available, but his essay actually created a kind of sensation around Hawthorne and Hawthorne's work. And he commented on Hawthorne's genius in the following manner, and I'll just read this particular quote for you all. He said in his essay, and I quote, "In one word, the world is mistaken in this Nathaniel Hawthorne. He himself must often have smiled at its absurd misconceptions of him. He is immeasurably deeper than the plummet of the mere critic, for it is not the brain that can test such a man, it is only the heart. You cannot come to know greatness by inspecting it. There is no glimpse to be caught of it, except by intuition. You need not ring it, but touch it, and you find it is gold." Unquote. So, this is how Melville looks at Hawthorne's work. He says that the brain can't test this work for its value, for the man. The brain can't test such a man. It is only the heart that can, sense the greatness of the
What he means
man.
is, as you said in the previous discussion, what he means is that heart, belongs to the emotion, belongs to the reality, belongs to the experience.
Right.
Whereas, ideas that emanate from the brain, they are mechanical, they are
Right.
repetitive.
Yes.
And they don't actually get the essence of reality.
Right. Also, that it is not superimposed. Ideas are
Yes.
not superimposed on reality. Ideas, it's not like where there is emotion and experience, there is no idea. But that idea emerges from the experience and emotion. And I think that is what he means when he says that it touches the heart and not the brain, because he's not writing an aesthetic, consciously writing an aesthetic unit called the short story. He is delving on an experience which in itself brings out, which touches you, but also brings out the quality of genius. And he refers to one more thing. He said you can't know greatness by inspecting it. By inspecting, I think he means you can't dissect it and categorize, and you cannot say this is genius and this is not.
So do not murder to dissect.
Yeah, yes, do not murder to dissect, precisely. And he says that it is understood only, genius is understood only through intuition. It is felt, and felt in a way, he says you need not ring it. There is no way in which you are going to say, oh, this is brilliant about the person, but touch it and you know that it is gold, right? So I think there is a sense of, when he prioritizes intuition, I thought this quote was very relevant, because this is exactly what Hawthorne, works best through, intuition and experience of, and of emotion. So, and it is multidimensional. What is very interesting in Hawthorne is that you're not even sure if he's sure of the idea that he's presenting. You know, when he says something, you see it and you're pretty much sure that the writer meant it, but the writer never really gives you any cues into making you believe that he knows what he's talking about.
That's true about all experiences in life.
Right.
You have an experience and there are different dimensions to
Right.
it. So you can't pin it down.
You can't pin it down, and you don't know that the writer is consciously bringing it before you. Does he have in mind the same thing that you have in mind? Because he doesn't give any sort of moral or a kind of a statement that would qualify and would justify what your thoughts. For instance, you know, at the very outset of the story, you know, he says that woman, you know, he in a way equates woman with nature. And he says woman is seen as mystery there, and nature is seen as mystery. So the two are equated, whereas man is viewed as the explorer and conqueror of both, right? You know, when look at this particular phrase that he uses from the story, he says, in those days when the comparatively recent discovery of electricity and other kindred mysteries of nature seemed to open paths into the region of miracle, it was not unusual for the love of science to rival the love of woman, unquote. What do you think he means here? He's obviously, you know, talking tongue-in-cheek here, but then beyond humor, you know, I thought it was damning in one respect.
The dry idea will not capture the reality. And there is so much wonder, there is so much mystery, there is so much magic. And that magic cannot be unfolded easily.
Yeah, so basically, if you how it spoke to me was that how men, you know, in the age of electricity and of discoveries and of all the, you know, all the kind of great discoveries that were happening around the time, you found that mysteries of nature that were impenetrable till the other day were now right before man to understand and to also you know, give some sort of a logic to, and how they had opened the paths into what earlier was miracle. Science is the answer to miracle in that sense, that, you know, what was the other day considered miracle is now scientifically proven. So science has been able to enter the region of miracle, and again, and the unusual, and therefore the love of science automatically rivals the love of women. You know, so you're equating women with that kind of a logic, that science is man, nature and woman come together as mysteries or as the unknown, which science, that is the male principle, the scientific male principle, will penetrate. You know, and I think it's got this kind of sexual metaphor, but beyond that also, I think it is to equate women with this kind of mystery. And this holds true really in the story, because Alma, who's you know, who's the protagonist in many ways of this story, we are told he's a man of science who had faith in man's ultimate control over nature, and he could not be weaned off from scientific studies for any other passion. And his obsession with science led him to correct what he sees as an imperfection in nature and an imperfection on his wife's face, that is her birthmark on the cheek. So it's also very interesting that Alma falls in love with Georgiana. And when he's in love with Georgiana, he doesn't see any flaw in her. He wants to marry her. But the moment he has married her, he sees this kind of a birthmark on her cheek, which is, we are told, in the shape of a little hand on her cheek. He finds it a kind of imperfection and a kind of a flaw that he wants to correct now. So it's the flaw of nature that he, as a scientific man, will correct now, and he wants her to remove that mark from his this blot from his wife's face. So, you know, and right in the beginning, so, you know, and the element of marriage, we are told that before his marriage he only wished it away, but now when he's married to this woman, he wants to remove it. Why? Is the wife a possession? That is his possession now, that he thinks he can act on her as he likes?
I think marriage can be scientifically decided, it can be explored, it can be analyzed, etc. But, you know, nature cannot be analyzed that way. Nature can be understood. But if you start replacing, you know, nature with intellect, then the consequences are going to be disastrous.
Yeah, in that sense it is a dystopia, in the sense the kind of obsession and blind pursuit of science that he's trying to capture in this story. But it's a very feminist story in that sense, because he's able to show you how Alma thinks that he has a right on another human being and can, you know, use his wife as an experiment for his own scientific experimentation, and he cannot be weaned from scientific studies, and his passion for his wife is also secondary in that sense. But the fact that he thinks that he can use his portions or his scientific knowledge on his wife, now that he sees it as a kind of a blot on her face. And this kind of I think it's in that sense, the very idea of trying to go for the infinite and trying to go after knowledge much beyond than what you. So it's a very that strain has existed since Renaissance, the strain of overreaching, right? For instance, if you see,
that's the correct word, yes.
Yeah, overreaching, and which you see also in Dr. Foster's, for instance, in Marlowe, or the whole idea, or Proust in that sense. So the idea of man's capabilities and man trying to overreach and trying to compete with nature, and trying and finding oneself vain enough to rectify what is wrong, what nature has left imperfect, or the flaws of nature, is in a way, it speaks of the conceited sort of the other dimension of progress and development, where you think that you can compete with nature and also overpower nature and conquer it. But in overpowering and conquering nature, you're actually not just, it's not a mineral or resource that you're talking about, it's a woman's body that you're working on, and you think that the woman's body doesn't even belong to her. Also, it's about perception. You see, Georgiana, till her husband tells her that it looks horrible on your face, she thought that it was a charm on her face. She thought that, she said that men would tell me that I look charming with this birthmark on my face. So I think there is a kind of a logic that Hawthorne is also conveying here, that human beings are defined by imperfections, and it is this sort of peculiarities, or she has a birthmark which has been with her since birth, right? And this mark makes her Georgiana, it makes her unique, it makes her human. So beyond, if you make human beings perfect, then they cease to be human beings.
They become dolls.
Yeah.
They become mechanical
Right.
toys.
So it's in fact, human beings become endearing because they are imperfect, and it is it is this that actually
imperfect is perhaps a wrong word,
yeah.
you would say. There's
Yes.
no imperfection.
There is no imperfection.
There is a given. There is a human being who
Yeah.
has identity of one's own.
Yeah. So I mean, in the sense of peculiarities, or in the sense of
Yes.
idiosyncrasies, or in the sense of something which is different, which you think does not. So he thinks that she's beautiful except for this particular mark on her face.
As if the whole thing depended on the correction of the mark.
Yeah, so the whole thing actually depends on the correction of the mark, as you see in this story. The whole story is about this particular thing. And Almer says to his wife, he says, and I quote, "No, Georgiana, you came so nearly perfect from the hand of nature that this slightest possible defect shocks me as being the visible mark of earthly imperfection," unquote. So he thinks that, she's come so nearly perfect through the hand of nature, and what the hand of nature could not correct, this slightest defect, the hand of man will do, and a man within quotes,
Yes, yes.
But what I thought about was that Georgiana, it also opened up the entire debate, which feminists have talked about, for instance, in the 20th century. It's about the male gaze and female perception, male gaze of the female body, that till Alma calls it a kind of a horrible mark on her face, she actually thinks it to be a charm on her face. So it is about this perception, that so much so that towards by the end of the story, she says that remove this blot from my face, remove it, remove it. She becomes as vociferous as the husband, about how detestable it is. So I think it also talks about the body image, or a woman's image, which is supposed to be perfect, the idea of perfection. He says, had that mark had Georgiana been less beautiful, he would have been okay. So again, the concepts of beauty attached to women, and concepts of perfectibility and perfection attached to women. I think it's a larger debate, larger feminist debate, that that you see actually opening up here, that Hawthorne is able to point out that how is Georgiana's body Almer's possession, And how is it that Georgiana, who thought herself to be beautiful and is unable to look at herself in the same manner because her husband does not? So, I think it opens this kind of debate alongside the scientific debate that we are talking about, which is Ulmer's obsession.
And I believe, I think you have to respond to this perhaps. I believe that what Hawthorne is saying is that this kind of a blot is a given, and it doesn't affect anybody, and it was not noticed earlier, and that she married a person who believed in science. So later on he said this is imperfect. So the word has been actually coined by the observer, the gaze that you talk about.
Right.
But then that is not the way to approach, reality or nature or any fact of life. You just look at it, see whether it's appropriate or not from your angle, and that is not the angle of the other person. So therefore, leave it at there, wherever it is. How do you?
Yeah. So it begins with.
What's the lesson of the story?
I think one of the lessons, the apparent lesson, is of course Ulmer's obsession. That overpowers him so much that he cannot look at his wife with a sense of repulsion. Now the mark seems to stand out for him, and he is not able to look at at his wife whom he loved earlier, and he looks at her now with sense of repulsion and a sense of unease, and that this must be removed, right? To the extent that he has a dream, and he mutters this in his dream, that that he is attempting an operation on the wife's face to remove that birthmark, and his wife and the knife went so deep into her skin that it actually reached reached to her heart, and finally he could not stop himself. Even when he knew that he would be taking the heart out, he actually goes and pierces the heart of the woman in his dream. So it is this kind of a restlessness, but also this kind of madness and frenzy that is attached to science.
I think you have picked up your words very cleverly, very intelligently. That the whole thing belongs to the idea of obsession. He is obsessed with it, and
he's obsessed with science and his own principal role in correcting any deficiencies of science.
Supposed deficiencies.
So, yeah, deficiencies of science, and he's competing with nature. He says that nature doesn't reveal its mysteries. It shows you, but it will never show you how it is made. And he's trying to contest with nature, and he says, human beings are made of clay, but tread with caution. But then he's doing exactly that. So there is a symbolic significance of the dream itself, that it talks about this blind pursuit of science at the cost of human relationships. And for Ulmer, it is experimentation and not the life of a human being and his wife.
By way of a query, does Hawthorne have that kind of sense of humor that is making the whole thing look ridiculous, and through that he is making his point?
I don't think it is ridiculed. I think he is it's more of, it's a story that is shown that, just trying to show this kind of eccentricity of the man. And the narrator treats in the beginning the man humorously, but then the humor turns dark, right in the beginning when he looks at the mark, the connections, associations. The first page tells us how he's a man of science and he cannot look beyond that, and he thinks that man needs to control nature and all of that, and suddenly he sees the mark on his wife's face and he thinks that it could be removed. That one moment when you make that connection, you know where this is going. He's going to bend on removing the cursed sort of, or the hand that he sees on his wife's face, and it exactly, so you actually see a kind of deterioration or a kind of dehumanization in the process of the man, and the woman is obviously taken to another level where she's talking about her duties and of her love, and she says, if you were to give me poison, I would drink it because I can't bear to see the repulsion that you have for me, so I'd rather die. And she's in that kind of a situation, and she drinks the potion that he makes, and finally you find that the woman dies.
So, I agree, it's a serious story. It's worked up with great effect and effort, and that finally what initially looked amusing becomes tragic.
Yeah, it is tragic. In fact, both the stories that I've discussed are tragic in their own ways. The first, the Artist of the Beautiful was tragic because there was a man who was inventing something who was not appreciated for his work, because invention purely meant mainstream invention of industry, or inventions that could help industrialization, and not invention, I think, that could be pleasurable. Right? Could invention also be something, could invention lead to pleasure? So I think that is something that here Hawthorne is pointing out, that Owen is able to talk about his, he's also obsessed in that sense with science, but he's thinking of pleasure. But here in the birthmark, you see that the theme in the story is this human flaws, that Alma is not able to see and is not able to live with, and for that he must, if he has to kill, then he would kill his wife and he would not think of her health, and Georgiana becomes the guinea pig for his experimentation. The question is also why Georgiana agreed to it. Is it love or is it duty? That she knows, she has this feeling that even when she knows the worth of her husband and she worships him as a scientist for all the portions and all the unique discoveries that he's made, she's obviously hesitant when it comes to her own body. That does she want that mark to be removed? That makes her her person. I mean, that mark makes Georgiana. Why would you want to take that unique feature out of her? That is first thing. But the other thing is that what kind of love is it that makes her accept her death by her husband? So this is also something that is the larger uh, social ethos that makes women adhere to certain things. That why is it so important for Georgiana to be admired by her husband, and in the absence of this admiration she'd rather die than live. So there is this whole idea around how women have been brought up to look for a kind of validation from the male, whether it is the males in the family.
And for all the wrong reasons.
Yes, and this is then obviously misused by Alma here. So I think both these stories, which form a, which are around science and technology, they take a different, there are very different perspectives on science.
So briefly, how would you explain the position of the author on social questions through these stories?
Yeah, I think what is central to his work, or is central to the short fiction, which is also there in the novel, is the idea of humanism. That wherever humanity, wherever the human, expression, human emotion is sacrificed, I think he takes a stand against it. And anything that can justify that human love or human emotion, I think he also stands by it. So at the cost of whatever social laws that exist around it. So I think he's if I were to pick up the most humanistic writer in America in the 19th century, I'd pick Hawthorne for his portrayal and his description, particularly of women around that time, that he's able to give them a sense of perspective and also scope in terms of their depiction. How women tend to believe in certain ethos, and if a woman transgresses according to society, then what becomes of her. So I think he offers a sharp critique of all of this through this. And I think it's not just that, it's about any sensitive individual. For instance, in The Artist of the Beautiful, you have a different take where Owen Warland is an artist, right? And he's an artist working with machinery. He's someone who's a sensitive individual. So I think he's talking, when he refers to sensitive individuals, then it is women and artists and poets and romantics who don't follow the herd mentality, I think.
So friends, the conclusion that Dr. Richa Bajaj has reached through her discussion of the two stories is that science can give you certain ideas about society, about human character and nature, but then the point to be stressed regularly is that human beings have to be accepted as what they are, characteristically speaking. So I think that's an important point, and Hawthorne has the courage to say it so very squarely in his short stories, and he takes a position. So I hope you have liked the interpretation that Dr. Chabajaz gave to Nathaniel Hawthorne's short stories, and there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to explore in the stories as well as in the contemporary writing at the same time that he wrote Nathaniel Hawthorne. So thank you.